Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to this live stream, this webinar event from the Journalism Initiative on gender-based violence as part of the 16 Days campaign. Really excited to have so many fabulous journalists with us, a couple still left to join. So thank you for everybody for joining us. Today, I'm really proud to launch our digital guidebook, Silence and Omissions, a media guide for covering gender-based violence. The guidebook was written by Cassette Thompson, and we're launching it today ahead of its print publication a little bit later this year. So the Global 16 Days campaign against gender-based violence marks December the 6th as the International Day of Remembrance for the victims of femicide, and I'd like to dedicate this talk to them. To open this conversation, I'd like to draw on a key concept from our guidebook, which is available to read and download now. In Chapter 3, we set out what we call the human rights approach to reporting on gender-based violence. And this doesn't just mean reporting on gender-based violence in the context of international human rights law, and with reference to key pieces of legislation, although that is part of it. When we talk about the human rights approach, what we mean is denormalizing gender-based violence. We mean that through our reporting, we say, no, this is not normal, and these crimes against women and gender non-conforming individuals would amount to torture or genocide in any other context. So while we denormalize gender-based violence, we also seek to normalize the solutions to gender-based violence. We normalize pressuring governments and leaders to step up, to stop their harassment of women activists, journalists, and human rights defenders. We normalize raising public awareness and saying that we will not accept femicide and the shockingly high numbers of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. I quote Cassette Thompson, our guidebook author, when she writes, "Vulnerability to gender-based violence is not an inherent characteristic of women's lives, but it often results from deeply rooted and interconnected factors." Now, what Cassette means is that reporting should look beyond what we perceive to be normal and try to trouble accepted wisdom that is often incorrect. The human rights approach also means that we denormalize violence against women and femicide. We reveal their systemic causes. And the revelation of these systemic causes of violence also shows us how culturally inflected and biased so much reporting on this issue has been. And we'll get more into that later, I think. The former Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Yakin Eserk, writes, "The human rights perspective needs to replace culturally tinted language in reporting incidents of violence against women." Yakin refers to labels such as crimes of passion or honor killing that are used euphemistically to try and mask the systemic causes of violence against women, which is the patriarchal subordination of women in the home, in work, in public settings, and in the media. Moving beyond culturally inflected reporting can change public opinion, and it can force political will. Today, we will hear from a range of fantastic journalists who have all excelled at covering femicide across the world. We will hear about how too often the voices of Indigenous women journalists have been silenced and the stories of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls have not been told. We will think about how best we can serve our subjects, how we can move beyond just telling stories of pain towards bringing about change. And with that in mind, if that's okay, I'd like to turn first to Mallory Adamski, Director of Communications and Advancement for the National Indigenous Women's Resource Centre. And Mallory, I'd like you to talk to us about how the media can best serve the families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. What's gone wrong in the past and what should be done differently? Thank you, Mallory.
Sure. Thank you, Kathy. I really appreciate the Center for Women's Global Leadership on this and for organizing alongside us, as well as the um, Journalism Project in that regard. So again, my name is Mallory Adamski. I am the Director of Communications and Advancement for the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, as well as the editor for our Restoration of Native Sovereignty and Safety for Native Women magazine. I think some of the fundamental issues here, you know, as the NAWRC, we advocate for the safety of Indigenous women who have been targeted by non-natives, non-Indigenous perpetrators, leading to this crisis of violence against Native women and the ongoing crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is femicide, period. Speaking more broadly, Indigenous women are around the world disproportionately victimized by this violence. And here in the US, it's no different. The latest statistics tell us that 4 out of 5, 80% of Native women are victimized by violence and, victimized by violence in their lifetime. And we know that about half, 1 out of 2 Native women are sexually abused, sexually assaulted, or raped in their lifetime. And it's this heightened level of violence that Indigenous women face that leads to so many of our Indigenous sisters going missing or being murdered. And the important key here too, I think, for media is to focus on who the offenders of this violence are. The most common question we hear here at the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center is why? Why is this violence happening against Indigenous women? And, you know, is it happening within the community? Is it, Indigenous on Indigenous crime? And the reality is no. The majority of Alaska Native women and Indigenous women, are targeted and harmed by the hands of non-Indigenous perpetrators in their lifetime. More specifically, 97% of Native female victims were harmed by interracial perpetrators. All of these numbers you can find in the National Institute of Justice's Violence Against American Indian and Alaska Native Women and Men report from 2016. And that's one of the few, but one of the best reports that we have to date in terms of numbers and reports for Native women. And the reality is it's a few years old. So we need consistent reporting and consistent data collection on these rates of violence against Native women. For us, what it comes back to is colonization and the reality that from the very beginning, westernized systems of justice in this country just weren't set up to fully protect Native women and protect communities. And you see, tribal governments are Indian nations, they're sovereign nations, and they have the authority to govern themselves. And safety for Native women and their families relies on the ability of tribes to be able to do that self-governance and reclaim those beliefs and life ways that they would self-govern through. So things, beliefs like protecting women as sacred, protecting children as sacred. And the reality is that self-governance, that tribal sovereignty has eroded over time. And essentially the case today is, it's just not happening in the way that it should. In particular, a Supreme Court case decision, and this is important for our media allies to understand, is, a Supreme Court case in 1978 essentially ruled that tribes don't have criminal jurisdiction over non-Indian perpetrators. And so if tribes can't prosecute non-Indian offenders for committing crimes on tribal lands, it jeopardizes the safety of Native women and just the communities as a whole. And this is the reality we live with. And that's, what we've been as advocates trying to call more and more attention to, is just the fact that these westernized systems of justice just don't fully protect Native women and communities.
Thank you very much, Mallory. That brilliant letting us know what the situation is there and giving us some background. Now, if it's okay, I'd like to turn to you, Brandy. I know that you've had some you know, just many years of amazing experience reporting on this issue. Here at CWGL, we've been watching what you've been doing. And I know you've just published a wonderful 6-part series on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls with Al Jazeera, you know, beautiful long form reporting there. So I wonder from your perspective, if you could drill down in some of the technicalities, some of the specific difficulties of reporting on this type of femicide, and what you've done as an Indigenous woman journalist to overcome these challenges, and what you can teach us all basically about what good storytelling, what ethical storytelling looks like in this context. Thank you.
Hi, Tansi. I'm coming to you from the lands of my ancestors, of the Michelle First Nation here in Treaty 6 territories in so-called Alberta, Canada. Thank you for having me. So, gosh, I just want to start out by saying that covering this genocide involves fighting for them, literally fighting for these stories to be heard. Because historically, it's getting a bit better, but historically, the media, the mainstream media and editors, you know, weren't interested. And it involved, you know, a lot of pushing. It involved advocating and convincing that these stories and these women and the lives of our women and girls are worthy and valuable to be told and of the public interest. So people that are doing, you know, this kind of work have to be prepared for that fight and to not give up, because it's worth it. And, you know, when you start breaking through those barriers, you really will find that there's a hunger out there to know these truths, because so many people, like, astonishingly, considering this was actually named a genocide by Canada's National Inquiry into this crisis, so many people have no idea that it's even occurring. So the media coverage has been like appalling. So I thought it was getting better because I work in it day in and day out. I exclusively tell Indigenous stories, and I have been for about 9 years now, doing Indigenous stories only. And so I think that I see it all the time. But a colleague of mine, a former news director that I had, Karen Pugliese, she was an instructor at Ryerson University in journalism, and she's now working for the CBC Investigations Unit. But last year, in December of 2020, she did some research and found that in the years since the National Inquiry started, so I think it was around 2016, national coverage on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in mainstream media has been less than 2%. Like, it's just insanity. We have our women and girls literally being, you know, murdered and disappearing all over the place, and you know, their voices are being silent. So when I heard those numbers, I was just totally floored. Like, I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was that bad. And so I, you know, push harder to do what I do. So say, for instance, this 6-part multimedia series that is rolling out right now with Al Jazeera English on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, the Highway of Tears, and the correlations to industry and violence against our women. I pitched that to Al Jazeera for a year. And they came to me last December and said, okay, we've got some money for this. Do you want to do it? And I jumped on it. And I put it all together, and my photojournalist and I went to Northern BC in February, and it's taken this long to like roll out. It finally started getting published. Part 4 will be published this week. But that's just an example of having to, you know, fight for our stories. And like, when people are working with these families who have been severely traumatized and who are grieving, and in many cases feel powerless, it's important to build relationships with them and humanize them in every way possible. You have to go out of the traditional norms of, journalism that they teach you in universities and college, and actually put your energy and your effort into building these relationships on the ground with these families and with these survivors. Because when you build that trust, because historically the trust between the media and Indigenous communities is broken, because for most of the time the media always got it wrong about our people, and there's a lot of damage there, and just perpetuating racism and discriminatory views, and the way that our people are portrayed. So I can't stress enough about building those relationships, and you will be rewarded with these stories that they bring to you. And so it's so important that our women and girls are humanized in the media, because traditionally our women and girls have been portrayed as prostitutes, as out on drunks and runaways and trash and not valuable. And so that perpetuates the violence towards our women, because the media plays such a huge role in societal perceptions, in bureaucracies, in all different areas. So it's so important that you focus in on the humanity of these women and girls and who they were, and intertwining that. The police don't take this crisis seriously. They are actually complicit to this genocide. And in many cases, as you will see in my series, rolling out, and I'm not the first to report on this, but RCMP themselves have raped and abducted our Indigenous women and girls. And it's so important that when you're reporting on these stories, to hold these powers to account. Hold the authorities, hold the governments, keep pressing, keep pushing for action, for answers, for accountability. I can't stress that enough, because that is, part of our role, in what we do. And in the stories that I tell in general, Indigenous stories, 90% of them involves human rights violations and trauma. And, so I refer to my work and myself as a human rights journalist. And it's really that type of work that you're doing when you're doing this type of work. So those are kind of the tips, and advice that I have to give. And I just want to really stress to you, if you put in that effort and, see it through, then it's going to help make such a difference to raise awareness of this crisis, to get the information out there so that, this can stop. Hi.
Thanks very much, Brandy. And I just wanted to ask you, do you think the relationship between the media and Indigenous communities has improved or changed at all? How do you assess that at the moment? And what would it take for that to improve?
I mean, it's getting better. I've seen a shift. So I also do some work for Journalists for Human Rights here in Canada, and I have given training on reporting in Indigenous communities to major newsrooms and such like that, across the country. So there's different initiatives, that media organizations are engaging with and doing their part in that way. And there are individual journalists that are on a path of reconciliation themselves and really getting interested and passionate about learning and about doing this kind of work. But also, oh man, I lost my train of thought. It was connecting to this, but yeah, I mean, it's changing. but guess what? In Canada, I have found in my work that the public and the media is quite apathetic towards a lot of our issues and a lot of these stories. So I specifically set out to tell these stories internationally so that they could get out to an international audience, in order maybe for, you know, people outside of this country to see this oppression, see these injustices, and maybe help create international pressure for something to be done. And I found that the international media has been amazing, with supporting, this kind of thing. But there is some major ones, and I won't name them, that I find are a little leery and I think they're scared. I think they're unsure and scared to cover this type of thing. Maybe they view it as radical or whatever it is. I'm just assuming, but there's some that are, kind of just dipping their feet in and not all the way. Do you know what I mean? To really delve into what is needed with getting our truth out there. But yeah, it is improving little by little. It is. Mm-hmm.
Thanks very much, Brandy. And yeah, I think it's true what you say, because I was going to say that I think when we report on femicide, actually, governments feel threatened by that, as we've seen with the killing of activists and women protesters. So it's a dangerous thing to report on. And I think some editors, I'm sure, feel that way. A bunch of you could probably speak to that. But I want to go to Jane next, because Jane, I know you've got a book forthcoming, which is very exciting. Your book, For the Good of the Force, which is a critical history of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So I think that that's relevant to bring in here, because I know that Brandy was talking about that difficulty holding power to account and going in on the institutional side. So I wonder if you could talk to us about doing that side of reporting on the RCMP and how you found that, and what you could share tips with us wise that might help us all when reporting on femicide.
Sure. I will say I identified far too much with some of what Brandy was saying about the Canadian newsrooms and their interest in some of these stories. I actually found, as a white reporter, it was quite easy for me to tell stories about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, which really says something about who audiences are willing to hear those stories from. And I actually, I got turned on to RCMP reporting specifically by 2 Indigenous women lawyers who actually said, we don't need more people coming into our communities and doing this. We need them to actually look at their own communities and their own power structures and report on those. And so that's actually how I got my start. Is I started with the cold case of Crystal Knott, who's a 16-year-old Métis teenager from Northern Alberta. And it was about telling her story, and it was about realizing that the RCMP had made a mistake in her case and had not publicized anything to do with her disappearance for 3 years. And at the end of the day, they wouldn't say anything about it. They wouldn't say why. They would just say, we've learned, but you have to take their word for it that they've learned. And so for me, that sort of made me realize that, I really needed to understand more about this institution, how it functioned, who it responded to, why it was okay that, that was an adequate answer, why it was okay. I filed an access to information request for a copy of these court files, which in the US you could get, it'd be hard sometimes, but you would get them. And all I get are photocopies of media articles about this case. That's the sum total the police will release, and you're supposed to trust that. And so, for me, I have always found it really important to remember what these institutions are there for. And if they're there in theory to investigate these cases and to prevent these horrific things from happening, they're not doing a great job of it. And I think that's something the numbers just show for us. So then the question becomes, okay, well, how are we holding them to account? How are we saying, hey, this is actually not an adequate job? So for me, especially with the Mounties, a lot of that, you know, in order to write in that very clear, direct way that really shows who, you know, where the buck stops, you have to really understand the institution. So, you know, I have my own, I've been working on this for 7 years, and, you know, all of a sudden in the last 6 months, everyone wants to talk about it with me, but nobody cared for 4 years. Like nobody, like no editors would take that. They were like, well, I guess maybe when it's closer to being done, like there's just not that support. And so I want to just echo what Brandy was saying about how you just have to, you have to be prepared for that, and you have to find a way to sort of box it and keep going. You know, one of the things that I try to do with this reporting is I try to be really transparent about my goals with individual families, because not every family wants their story to be the story that goes after a system. Some of them just want it to be a story in which they get to tell you about the person that they loved who's gone. And so sort of the key point for me up front whenever I meet a new family is to say, this is what I do. This is what my approach is. Would you like to do this with me? Or would you prefer that I pass you along to a different reporter who can do what you're looking for right now? So I try to just be sort of extra transparent with that respect. I will say, like, the one thing that I feel like I've learned really well, and it's sort of been underscored for me as I've been teaching at Ryerson University this fall with journalism students, is specifics. I think we are very much, as a digital society, comfortable saying things like, you know, like categorizing things, bad things that people have done, and sort of saying this is a story about abuse, or this is a story about, some other issue. We get very focused on the terms that we have used and less on sort of actually what happened. And so what I try to do is go as specific as I can, and to actually say, okay, if you're describing something bad that happened, like, you know, tell us how it started, like actually get into those details in your reporting, even if you're not going to put them in your piece, because it helps you write, I think, sentences that are closer to the truth, that allow for more of that nuance to come in. So that's, you know, those are the two things that I've carried with me as I have sort of switched from reporting on cases to reporting on the institution. Is one is making sure my approach isn't a surprise to anyone that I work with, and two is making sure that you know, if someone describes something casually and says, oh, well, this was really bad, or this happened, that I actually get into that I actually take it apart until I find terminology that they're happy with, that accurately reflects their experience, but also that is specific enough that, you know, someone who maybe just think, you know, has like sort of that like free speech buzzer in their mind, and they're like, oh, that's a bad word, I've been taught to, you know, because I think sometimes, especially, you know, from my position as a white reporter, I can get through, like, I can reach a different kind of audience because of who will be willing to listen to me. And so I see sort of a responsibility in that, in needing to get through some of those words. I don't need to use, you know, I don't need to speak, you know, in the exact same terminology of one report or another report. If I know that that's a thing that's going to make some people just turn off, I have a responsibility to try to reach those people who don't want to hear it. And so I sort of try to write with that specificity and that institutional focus. I'm very bad at webinars, so I'll cut myself off there.
No, you're great, Jane. Thank you very much. We're excited about your book and the investigative work that you've been doing into the RCMP, because I think that's an important part of this story, as Mallory and Brandy have already laid out. And I think you raised a couple of really good points there about the importance of specificity and also about transparency going into the interview setting, which might be something that we'll take for granted, but I don't think every reporter does. Now, I know, Alice Driver, you've written a brilliant chapter for our new guidebook, and you've gone into some of these facets of ethical reporting, the importance of transparency, and your experience really speaks to that. I'm talking about your book, More or Less Dead, Femicide, Haunting and the Ethics of Representation in Mexico. So I wonder if you could just 7 or 8 minutes or so, just give us a kind of a quick whistle-stop guide to kind of your ethical approach, what you've added to our guidebook, and things that came up that surprised you during your reporting.
Thank you, Kathy. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here with everyone. So for the media guide, I work a lot with photographers on issues of representation. And so I interviewed a National Geographic photographer who just did a really powerful piece, Smita Sharma, on trafficked girls in India. She's an Indian photographer. And so I wanted to showcase work where we would have a visual example, because for me, often with reporting on femicide, the visuals are often horrifying. I mean, it's often a mangled body or all of the physical violence, which often families, that is not what they would wish to show about their love, their daughter, or and you really need, what should be at the forefront of your mind as a reporter is how these families want their daughters represented. And so at the heart of this issue, and it's often structural issues with femicide, one of the structural issues in photography is that on a global level, only 15% of photographers are women or non-binary at news organizations. So that means 85% of the images that we are seeing in general in the news are produced by men. And so one of the things that I've been working on, and I work a lot with Women Photograph, Hiring from Women Photograph, which is an organization that's based in the United States, but has a global membership, including non-binary, trans, and Indigenous photographers. And part of the issue, because I'm a freelance journalist, and so often when I get assignments from National Geographic or Time, I will specifically request a photographer. I will say, I want to work with a woman, I want to work with a non-binary photographer, I want to work with an Indigenous photographer, because editors often, I'll tell the truth, I've had editors tell me, I don't know a woman. Like they will say things like this, and it sounds terrible, but part of the problem is that people work within their circles of influence. And so especially with men who make up the majority of photographers and hiring photographers, they work within their circles of influence. And so you have to push that on the visual side. Even though I'm a writer, I care about the visual when I'm working on the issue of femicide. And so, or when I apply for a grant, I apply for money and I name the photographer. I'm giving the money to this photographer who I am hiring, because if you don't push it, you will end up with someone. I've worked with male photographers when I'm reporting in Mexico. They're doing the photography. They don't believe in femicide. They tell me everything's a homicide. I've had so many people tell me that, and that's what they believe. They have, that they haven't been educated as to the language, or, they say, anybody who's killed, that's a homicide. And that's the end of it for them. And so there's a real issue in terms of thinking of visuals and thinking of who you're going to hire. And also when I interviewed Smita Sharma, who did this really beautiful piece for National Geographic, and she was working with girls, underage subjects who'd been trafficked. And she said, there's such an important issue of time, which is another structural issue. As a journalist, it's very rare to have the support to do a long-term project and to gain that kind of trust. So it's not that, journalists are being, they only spent a day there. It's often they only have the budget for a day. So that's a definite important critique, but it's often structural. And so something that she said was she spent, I think it was 3 to 5 years working on this project. And that often requires grants and different sources of funding and things like that. But time is an issue in terms of trust. And one of the other things that she talked about, which I thought was really important, was talking to the girls she was working with. They didn't want their faces shown, no identifying marks. And another thing was that they were even afraid they might be identified by their clothing. And so she actually went to the market and bought clothing that she had them wear in the portraits. And so these are details that I thought I hadn't thought of that before. And you really need to be in communication with your subject and think first of protecting them and also of showing something. Smita said she was protecting them, but she used lighting she wanted to capture their personality, to show, how young these girls were, that they were children, and to do it in a way that she said she also showed all of the images to the girls. And so it's really a collaborative approach to working with, in this case, a lot of the trafficked girls do end up being victims of femicide, but this was a project that was in process. And so it can be with the girls or with the families. And I think, those are points that are really important. But I would encourage everyone, especially editors, to look at women photograph and to think about hiring women and non-binary and Native photographers, because there's a huge issue of underrepresentation, especially when it comes to representing femicide.
Thank you very much, Alice. You raised some great points there, and I'm struck remembering your interview with that photographer as well from the guidebook. So everybody, check that out if you get a chance, because like Alice says, some of those details of reporting we might not all pick up on, but we've got a lot to learn from each other. Suzette Brewer, thank you very much for joining us. Now, Suzette served as the producer and writer for a documentary called A Broken Trust about sexual assault on tribal lands. And Suzette, I wanted to ask you how you kept your sources safe, how you dealt with their ongoing issues of safety while you were making that film, and also how did you navigate some of the complexities in the story, because I know that was a really legally and jurisdictionally complex piece of journalism that you were involved in.
Well, in terms of, can you guys hear me, by the way? I just want to make sure that my microphone's on. Okay, thank you. I just want to say that by the time I served as the field producer, as all of you know, for this project. They had already been working on this thing for 6 months when they contacted me. They were not getting anywhere, to be quite honest. And a lot of it had to do with issues, and I'm sure Brandy and Mallory can attest to this. There were a lot of issues around trust. They're not gonna just talk to a pack of random journalists who come to the reservations about their experiences. And so they were not getting any traction. They were not getting any return phone calls. And, this is very common, to be quite honest, with non-Native journalists. And I think part of it too stems from the fact that, the tribes have been, whatever the issue is, it doesn't matter if it's education, sexual assault, housing, doesn't really matter. I mean, there's been so much misreporting and lack of nuance in stories about Indian country that, honestly, tribes aren't that enthusiastic when, like I said, a pack of journalists show up and want to report on things, because, it boils down really to simple things like understanding, for example, like I spoke with a reporter from the LA Times who thought Lakota and Sioux were two different tribes. I mean, it's that dumb. I mean, to be quite honest. And so I think, when I came on board, there was a lot of trust building that we had to do, and a lot of what you're describing, which is, making them feel safe, making them feel, like they're being heard and seen, and that we're not exploiting them. I mean, that was very important to me, to be sort of the lead, in going into these communities. It was very important that, we built that trust based on, we're not here to embarrass you or, do anything that's going to, cause you pain in the future. We just want to get down to the nitty gritty on what is happening and or not happening in these communities. I think the subjects that we ultimately wound up with, I think by that point they were very keen to share their stories and to share their, what they had gone through out of a pure sense of outrage. I think they were kind of ready to tell their stories. And even, I don't know how many of you have seen the actual documentary, but even the cop, the female cop in the story, you know, there, we even had to, you know, make sure she understood, because, you know, she never came out and said it, but I'm 100% certain that she is also, you know, a survivor. And so everybody in this story, everybody in that documentary, pretty much everyone that you see on screen are all survivors of one type or another, whether it's violence, whether it's sexual assault, you know, you can just pick one. So I think it really was about building trust with them and letting them know that, you know, there's someone on scene that understands who they are, where they come from. You know, maybe we don't have the exact same, you know, experiences coming from Native communities, but, you know, a very shared experience. And so I think it really took that to get this project really kind of aloft and off the ground. So that we could complete our work, because it was very important to me personally that, you know, this thing really carried with it a sense of gravitas, but also, you know, a nuanced sensitivity about the various issues that these women have to confront every single day. I just want to go back to one thing real quickly that Brandy had mentioned in her comments. I came in late and I apologize for that, because I'm on the road, as you can see, I'm in my car. So I had to pull over so I could get onto this thing, but I'm traveling for work. But I want to go back to one thing Brandy said about, you know, non-Native journalists covering these subjects and, you know, the potential fear they might have. I think that's actually true. I think, you know, I was on a panel just a couple of weeks ago for City University of New York, and one of the students there had told me that for his graduate thesis, there was a project he wanted to do. And that his advisors had told him it was too complicated. I disagree. I think, you know, the fact that it is complicated is the reason he should do it. Because I think that's typically what happens in Indian country. And I think Mallory could also attest to this as well, is that it is complicated. It is very nuanced. It is very, you know, there's a lot of different cross sections and confluences of jurisdiction, of, you know, sentencing guidelines, all different kinds of things. And that is exactly the reason these subjects should be covered, is because they are so complex. What winds up happening is that Native women, you know, throughout North America, I mean, and I don't even want to get into, you know, the women and girls in Latin America that are, you know, that have zero protection whatsoever. But in North America, you know, for both Canada and the United States, it is a very complex set of laws in which, you know, Native people are often, they fall through the cracks. And so I think there really is kind of a hesitance to cover these issues in newsrooms, because they really don't know. And so that's one of the reasons, as I've said to Mallory before, that I do these panels, because, you know, whatever I can do to push that ball up the hill, whatever I can do to help, you know, enlighten people so that they have a little bit more confidence, so that they know where to go for resources, so that they can feel more confident about what they're doing, I think is important. Because, you know, the Indian country is very small. We represent 1% of the population. And so in journalism, it's less than 1%. I think it's 0.75. And what that means is, you know, I can't be everywhere at once. And there are things that are happening on a daily basis across the country in every judicial circuit that are egregious, but, you know, I'm only one person. And even with everybody in Native journalism, even if we were all tasked today with covering these subjects, we would be busy for the rest of our lives. That's how prevalent this is in terms of a crisis. You know, whether it's murdered and missing, whether it's sexual assault, whether it's on Indian lands, whether it's off Indian lands, whether it's in urban areas, it doesn't matter. We would be busy for the rest of our lives, because that is how prevalent these crimes are for Native people. I mean, there are, you know, there are medical examiners sitting on top of coroner's reports all over the country that they will not release, because it's going to implicate law enforcement, to be quite honest. So it's a thing where it is vast and complex, and that's exactly why we should be focusing our efforts on these things as much as we possibly can, because I feel like until we get some traction with our non-native colleagues, we're just going to continue to spin our wheels. And so I hope that helps, but that's sort of, I think trust building is the biggest thing. I think, but even before that, to build that trust, if you're going to be covering these subjects, the best and most important thing you can do is research the community that you're going into. Try to make contacts with the people in charge, meaning the tribal council. Let them know what you're working on, and what your objectives are, because you're not going to get anywhere without them anyway. That was one of the things they learned the hard way on Broken Trust, is they had been working for 6 months, we're not getting anywhere, and I had to ask them, did you go to tribal council, or did you just march onto the reservation and start talking? And it was the latter, of course. And so no one's going to talk to them. And so the way I explained it to my colleagues is, you wouldn't walk into Exxon in New York and expect to start talking to their employees without permission. You have to think of it the exact same way. You've got to let somebody know that you're there, what your purpose is. And, and sometimes, we had to go before tribal council to get permission. And that was my job. So again, it's a complex subject. Indian people are really worn out from all the things that are happening. And, they don't have a lot of time to spoon feed you and bring you along, and if they sense that you haven't done your research or have no clue about what, who they are as a tribe, or what band they belong to, what linguistic group they belong to, they're not going to pay attention. So I think that's the flip side of the coin. I mean, it's one thing to hold people accountable, but it's quite another on the journalistic side to make sure that, you've educated yourself about just basic things about these communities that are crucial to reporting these stories.
Thank you very much, Suzette. Yeah, some really great points there. And what struck out to me was when you talked about misreporting and lack of nuance and how that's been an issue in the past. And I wanted to come to Chantal, Chantal's an independent journalist in Mexico and working on a book about the families of the disappeared. And I know, Chantal, that you're working within your own community or around the places that you live. So I wondered if you could talk to us about how those problems of misreporting and lack of nuance in the past on the issue of the disappeared in Mexico has made your reporting harder, and what you've tried to do to circumnavigate that and get past it. How have you tried to do things differently, Chantal?
Okay, that's a hard question. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's great listening to all of you. I mean, it's a hard question because I've been focusing on this topic for almost 6 or 7 years now, and I'm still figuring out, it's something that you keep questioning yourself almost every day. It's 24/7, right? And I think the main challenge that I'm having now, especially as I'm starting to rewrite my book once again, is finding a balance, right? We all know that we don't want to portray them as passive victims, but I've also noticed, especially here in Mexico, this narrative that keeps glorifying the mothers who search, because we want to highlight the work they are doing to expose what the government is not doing, right? Or that the state is not paying attention to. But I think there's this narrative of resilience that is becoming exhausting, right? Because many of these women are exhausted. We are exhausted, right? And we keep glorifying that these women are doing this, especially in Mexico. The feminist movement has become super strong in the past year with the protests. but we are just staying there, you know, in these super women who are going against the government. And I think we're missing the impact of this struggle on them. You know, we are not talking about how many of these mothers are falling ill, you know, or they have mental health issues, and the government is not offering any services, right, to help them face these issues, or the economic situation, because their lives now is just searching for their missing daughters. So I think it's always really hard to find this balance, right? And also, like you have all been mentioning, is, you know, the media standards, the space that you have in a story. In my case, it's been really hard to sell a future or follow-up stories to go deeper, you know, into the long-lasting impacts of disappearances. I guess that's why I chose the book format, but it's also not sustainable, right? I'm a freelancer with no financial support. I guess I'm happy and proud of myself that I have created the time and a safe space to work on this, but it's also draining to not have the financial support and to always negotiate with editors. In my case, I focus on international media, like Brandy just mentioned. It's kind of easier to get that space for the story, because here I'm also competing with foreign correspondents who keep discovering the stories, right? Which is really annoying too, but I'm not gonna focus my energy on that. But anyway, I guess that we are always evolving and trying to come up with with a story that is full of lived experiences, not information, you know. And what editors and the media wants is just information. So I think what I'm struggling right now is how I can create a space for these women to share whatever they want to share with me. I'm always really honest with that, you know, that they can share with me whatever they want. And if they don't want to answer some of my questions, that's totally fine. And then my responsibility as a filter, because at the end of the day, I'm a filter, how I can continue transfer their lived experience onto a white page without killing the story more, you know, because usually we re-victimize, or in case of disappearances, we erase some crucial parts of the identity of the survivors or the person, the missing woman, right? And it's always hard because of all these limitations of the industry, the media, the white editor. This morning, my friend sent me a pitch call. And, you know, now everybody's doing these pitch guides to help you how to pitch better those publications. And the first question was something like, are you the right person to tell this story? And I was just like, of course I am, but I don't know if you're gonna think that I'm the right person, right? Because it's usually like that. It's the editor who gets to choose if you are the right person, even though you've been working on this issue forever. So I think portrayal is one of my current issue right now, which obviously I faced that in the beginning, but now is coming up again, especially because the world keeps moving. You know, what we have experienced in the past 2 years has changed a lot our relationship to losing people, to grief, to pain, right? So the storytelling also needs to evolve, because probably now we're gonna connect to more people that before we couldn't, because now they have experienced pain in a way that they never thought they were gonna experience pain and loss and grief, right? So we gotta continue doing that. And also I wanted to share some things that have helped me during my interviews, is creating a safe setting for people, which I think the majority of the time we don't consider that. I know that a lot of people don't have the time, you know, to spend a whole day interviewing families. In my case, I have created that, you know, that space and that time for the family to decide when they want to do it, if they want to stop, have lunch, and then come back to the interview, all of that. But my last big reporting experience was in the Balkans, which was my first time working with an interpreter. And for me, it was really frustrating because I'm used to either doing interviews in Spanish or English, which is obviously not my first language, but I feel comfortable with it. But in the Balkans, obviously, I don't speak the languages there. And I was feeling really frustrated because for the first 5 years of my reporting, I think my main objective was to understand the way the mother of the missing used to share their stories, because there's a lot of information there, you know, how they form the sentences, the way they decide to narrate their stories. Many of them sound like a speech because they are the women who are more used to talk to journalists. So you know that when they have this established narrative, it's going to be really hard to get through that because they just want to get the story out there, and they know that as a journalist, you are not going to do more for them, right? So it's really hard to go deeper and let them know that you are not a journalist who are going to get the story out there because you're a freelancer, you don't have the resources. So you just want to offer another angle to the story that other journalists already got out there, right? But in the Balkans, it was a life-changing experience because that's when I started paying attention to their body language, right? To the pauses, or how the body was starting to reflect the pain that the story was carrying, the story that I wasn't even understanding yet, right? But their body was talking to me before that. And for me, that was incredible because, and I also felt bad because I realized of the past mistakes in the past, you know, that I kept asking questions to these mothers when their body was just processing the story that was gonna emerge throughout the interview, right? And it's hard because you also gotta decide, do I wanna continue this interview and go deeper? Because I'm gonna have to leave her in 1 or 2 hours, and is she gonna stay by herself? Does she have a support network? We don't know, right? So sometimes you just gotta choose, like, I just need this for my story or for my book project. We don't have to go to that part of the story, you know? And other times the women are like, no, I'm here, you better listen, and I'm just gonna continue talking. And well, you just gotta continue listening, right? And my last point is also the multiple violences, right? I was so focused on disappearances, on the search for the disappear, and this happened in Colombia. So after doing all this work in Mexico, I decided to look outside of Mexico because it was becoming too overwhelming. You know, I knew that it was not only Mexico who was going through all of this, and I wanted to learn from other countries. So I went to Colombia, I did my research, I planned, I was really proud of myself, of all my previous work. And when I get there, I have all, you know, I think we have all been in this situation that you have these questions and you know that probably the interview is not gonna go that way. But halfway through the interview, I kept asking this mother about her missing son. It was a missing son. And then she's like, but you don't want to know about my daughter. And I'm like, and I was checking my notes. I didn't have the resources to hire a fixer. Just some colleagues helped me to get access to some families, right? And what my colleague had told me is that she was looking for a son. And then she starts telling me that her daughter was sexually abused, was kidnapped and killed, you know, and I wasn't aware of that. So obviously the interview changed completely because this is not only a mother who is looking for a missing son, this is a mother who is looking for a daughter who was abused, kidnapped. She was missing for a few weeks and then she was found dead, right? And I don't even remember what I did there. You know, I wasn't prepared for that. And I think for me, that was a reality check of how I need to prepare myself better, that violence are are multiple. You know, it's just not women facing one kind of violence, and we need a different set of resources to understand each violence and how they all come together. So yeah, that's something that I'm still learning. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Oh, thank you, Chantal. We could all listen to you all night, and you make some great points there that I hadn't thought about, things like looking at the body during an interview, and also this idea of victimization, and sort of putting people on pedestals, turning them into heroic characters, and how both of those can sometimes be problematic. And I know that's something I struggled with in my book reporting as well, like telling stories of resistance to enslavement, but also not wanting to tell a sort of two-dimensional story of resistance. But this idea of re-victimizing through writing and reporting these stories, I think is something that Mallory would like to pick up on again in reference to our guide, if you'd like to step in, Mallory.
Sure, thank you, Kathy. Our team at NAWRC, it works closely with a working group of Native women. These are mothers, aunties, sisters, grandmas who have lost their loved ones and are still pursuing justice years and sometimes decades later. And there's that pain and that grief there that everyone kind of spoke to in their own way. And it made me think about that as we were talking. And I've spoken with this working group, and it's really heartbreaking to hear that their experiences with media just aren't all that positive. And we know that mainstream media has sort of largely overlooked and underreported on these issues, on femicide, on MMIW. And I think someone else mentioned that we're sort of seeing a slow change in that trajectory. But when mainstream media have reached out to some of these families that we are connected with, again, some of these women and families are still reeling from these crimes. There is that ask for the gory details and asking to, the expectation of having them retell their stories over and over again. And it's extremely invasive. Without proper training and without proper guidance and sort of the survivor-centered and trauma-informed approach, this practice is extremely traumatizing for these family members. And they're essentially having to sort of relive that experience of having their loved one lost, or learning that their family member was killed and that there's no resolve, and they're having to experience that over and over again. And I think that's why I found this panel so important, is to really, participate in this, to sort of call attention to that need for more cultural sensitivity, more centering of survivors when reporting on femicide, when reporting on missing and murdered Indigenous women, and even to, sort of redirect some of that intensity and that negative energy too, to calling attention to the lack of federal response, or sort of the authority response to fully investigate these issues and these crimes. It's, for us in the US, it's the federal government who wants to handle criminal jurisdiction in these cases. So what's the holdup? We need them to act now, and this really is a human rights issue. The crisis isn't just about a one-time violent crime. We're talking about a spectrum of violence that's happening against Native women, and just the broadness of how prevalent this issue is. And we're talking about systematic discrimination in the US justice system, and for many justice systems around the world for our Indigenous relatives, and how that lack of enforcement, that lack of prosecution, is allowing these violent crimes to turn into this crisis of femicide, of this crisis of MMIW. And it's ongoing that these cases are going underreported, they're uninvestigated and just unresolved. And these families, these missing and murdered relatives, deserve justice, period. And so that's why I really appreciate the guidebook, because right up front, chapter 1, right away, there's a focus on that survivor-centered approach. And we completely agree with the recommendation to avoid re-traumatization and just these practices of disempowering your subjects when you're interviewing. And this really, unintentionally may be sort of perpetuating the violence against Indigenous people and the harm that we experience as a people. As someone had mentioned before, the media hasn't always been kind to covering Indigenous issues and has sort of left a lot of communities sort of parachuting in and leaving with these stories, and we're not necessarily empowered by those stories and sort of the portrayal of Native people. So it's time for that to change. And so I think I really appreciate the guidebook in particular for sort of putting that front and center.
Thank you very much, Mallory. Yeah, and it'd be wonderful if everybody could check out the guidebook, chapter 1 that Mallory mentioned there, the survivor-centered approach. Really just lays out the core of what we're trying to do, and how important it is to really be respectful and raise up the survivors of gender-based violence. This reminds me of something that was in an article of Brandy's I was reading earlier, when you mentioned that the justification for white settler violence against Indigenous women was always that they would say that they're less than human. They would dehumanize the victims. And this reminded me of the reporting that I was doing on Yazidi survivors of Islamic State violence. And they would say the same thing, that the ISIS justification was that these Yazidi women are less than human. So, and I think that that's why the survivor-centered approach is important, because it is about saying, no, we're going to treat people, they've been dehumanized so badly that we are going to treat people with the ultimate respect that they deserve as part of our journalism. And we're still going to hold power to account. We're going to do all of those things at the same time. This also recalls something that I saw Jane say on Twitter recently, where she quoted somebody talking about one of her classes, saying how important it is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And I hadn't heard that before, but I really like that. And I wanted to bring in Diana Washington Valdez at this point, who's an award-winning investigative journalist and the author of The Killing Fields, Harvest of Women about Femicide in Ciudad Juarez. And Diana, I wanted to ask you how during your career you've gone about comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to your conference featuring these distinguished journalists. And hello to all. And well, I started my career in journalism 30 years ago. Can y'all hear me? Okay. And I don't know what it was about what I did, but always there was controversy about anything I wrote. People had covered, mayors wanted to get me fired. And I thought I was doing something wrong. I thought, well, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but why are these people angry at me, mad at me? I can say that, well, that never went away. And so I just learned to live with it. But anyway, I don't know that the very human aspect of covering femicides is my forte. I will tell you right now that it's not. Because my objective in covering the femicides, first of all, beginning in Juarez, was to investigate, which I think is a different approach than when you're seeking to tell stories, to bring an issue to the forefront. I think that's a beginning, all right? And I think that other journalists are stronger and better at that than I am. I jumped into this because I wanted to find out who was killing the women and why. And so my approach to this whole saga lasted years, and my editors were not very happy that I was spending so much time with it. But I did what I felt I needed to do, and it's all right to give yourselves permission to be passionate. I had to learn that myself. It's all right, just be objective, but don't, the passion has to be there, I think, to carry you throughout the whole thing and endure. So for me, stepping back and looking at the reporting that I did in the book and collaborating with others on, and collaboration is a wonderful thing. When I started out, it was very different. The marketplace here was very competitive and individualistic, and I thrived in that. But over the years, I also saw the need and I saw the value for collaborating with other like-minded journalists. Right? Very important. So whenever someone came through here and they were parachuting, and we had a lot of parachute types come in and they wanted help, and I would help. I was always glad to help them, take them to meet sources, as long as they weren't the lazy types, just wanted to hand everything over to them. I was always willing to help anybody out. And I think in the long run, that also helped me. But as I step back on and look at things now, I see that there is a need for a regional or localized creation of a law that defines genocide, not on a global level or a national level, but a more localized level. And that involves working with lawmakers who they were already thinking along these lines, and I think some of them are. Looking at the structure of law enforcement and the breakdowns of law enforcement, which we know is in Mexico, it's pervasive. It's sad because that contributes to the problem, that contributes to non-compliance with laws, contributes to non-investigations, and so on and so forth. But that's also important. And what are the roots of that breakdown in law enforcement? You could be seeing something like Italy experience when the mafia started taking over the society. It infiltrated law enforcement, the judiciary, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's what's happening in Mexico now. I saw it happening like 10 years ago. It's very important to collaborate, to work with sources who are direct sources like police, the advocates, the relatives and friends of victims. And very important too, that you establish a rapport with the sources so that, especially the family, so that you're able to go back and re-interview them later, because it's important sometimes to interview the same source 2, 3, 4 times, because they'll remember something else, something key, very important that they didn't remember the first time. So if you're investigating, you need to be taking those notes down and setting them aside, saving them for later. That's what I have to do. The laws are also a story in themselves. For example, in Chihuahua State, the murders of women at one time were categorized under a classification of miscellaneous crimes. Men's murders were reported as homicides, but the homicides of women were reported under miscellaneous crimes. So that's either because there was an attempt to hide, how bad women's crimes were, or simply because they were so rare. They considered them as, oh, this is unusual, so just put them under miscellaneous. But there is a need for reform there. There was, and that's changed already. But by bringing attention to those things or issues. The statute of limitations in Chihuahua State, the statute of limitations for the murders, period, was 14 years. So if you killed someone 14 years later and a day after, haha, you got away with it. That's it. It's over. Nobody has to come back. Nobody can come back and prosecute you. That in itself, again, is a story worth pursuing, and who's reforming them, and if the reforms happen, and so forth. Let's see. I made some notes because I wanted to make the most use of time, but all right. Name the killers. This is very tricky because if you don't have direct evidence, I mean, in journalists, we're not, prosecutors, we're not the ones who are going to arrest someone and try them in court. But you can at least know that, for example, if organized crime is involved, and in the systematic murders of women in Mexico, it most definitely is a part of how organized crime operates. It's kind of like a modus operandi. All right, you can describe the organization. You can describe the main activities that organization conducts. Safety is an important issue, both for yourselves and for the sources. You also have to check your sources and, you know, cross-check them, because you might have a terrific police source, but you also need to know if that police source is on the up and up, or trying to mislead you, or simply reporting back to the others what you're wanting to know, and what, you know, what you're asking. And that happened to me. So 2 or 3, it doesn't, you know, you need to devote some time to this. If it's an investigation, 2 or 3 sources saying the same thing, well, then maybe you can give it some credence, all right? Perhaps you don't have a document, but you have 2, 3 very good sources that say the same thing, independent of each other. It was an important guide that I adopted early on in these femicide investigations. The laws, again, I go back to the laws. The United States federal government, this happened during, I think it was the second Bush administration, the second Bush, Bush's son president. Sex trafficking used to not be a crime. It'd be a federal crime. I said, what? It's not a crime? No, it's not a crime. They had to create a law making it a crime. So then the federal investigators could get involved. This is why legal reforms are so necessary. We take things for granted. Oh, this should be a crime. This should be against, this is against humanity, and so on and so forth. But the laws are there to guide law enforcement and to give them the tools and the jurisdiction and the ability to intervene. And that's very important. All right. Sometimes your reporting may want to highlight an area that lacks this kind of legal support. And so your reporting might be what a legislator needs to say, hey, I'm on it. I'm going to introduce to make this a law in Congress or the Parliament or whatever it is. Those tools are important not only for journalists to pursue, but also for the investigators themselves. Well, international is very important because, as we know, organized crime has become very international. Sex trafficking, pedophilia, femicides, and it would not be too soon to start making friends with people like an Interpol. And I believe that we will see more laws, because there has to be, making femicides more of a genocide issue that occurs in something outside of a war environment. Because frankly, what you and I probably would agree, there's a war going on here. It's a war against women. But the society won't see it that way. It's a cultural issue also. But again, the laws, this is where the law can come in, and it doesn't care if it's cultural or not cultural. This is a crime, we're going after it. It requires international resources. Let's go, let's do it with jurisdictions to apply laws, to enforce laws with teeth. I saw in Mexico how many human rights organizations came in, Amnesty International, you name it, they all came. The Inter-American Court for Human Rights came in, was the strongest edict against the Mexican government for the femicides, but they're still occurring. Looking at prevention, what is being done to prevent these crimes? What kind of stories can we write that offer safety tips for communities? We have social media tools now that we didn't have before. They're very helpful. Of course, they can also be used to track you and find you. But the women of today in Mexico, modern women, are fighting back, and they're not rolling over and playing dead like victims. And so it's very good to see that, because that too will have an effect on the rest of the society, the political class, as they call it there, the elite class. Making this noise is very important. Making this noise is very important. This is where media comes in. Mainstream media needs to hire more Indigenous reporters, period. And Indigenous reporters, reporters who work freelance, continue to pursue collaboration. Say, maybe you don't have a full-time reporter, maybe I can freelance for you because I know my community. I can go in there, you can't, but I can go in and out, etc. Those kinds of partnerships, I think, are possible, okay, and necessary. And I think I'm out of my time, but all right, I think I'm out of time. That's what I wanted to share, some of my main points.
Thank you very much, Diana. It was a great point about the importance of representation, and also very powerfully you told us that this is a war on women, and I think we all agree with that. And I want to go slightly across the globe now to introduce the wonderful Rana Husseini, who's a journalist based in Jordan. I think Rana is in Amman. Welcome, Rana. And Rana is also the author of Years of Struggle, the book, which has just come out about the history of the women's movement in Jordan, and also Murder in the Name of Honor. Now, Rana, I know that your work has actually changed the thinking around so-called honor killings in Jordan and in the wider Middle East, and that actually through some of your reporting, you've ended up seeing some changes in law and legislation there. So I wondered if you could talk to us about how you changed public perception and challenged conventional wisdom around femicides where you are.
First of all, thank you very much for you and the Center for inviting me. And I'm really honored and privileged to be among these distinguished and powerful women. And I enjoyed listening to your stories and your experiences, especially on indigenous women. I don't know how to pronounce, because this is not something that is very known here in Jordan or in this part of the world. So it's always important to hear other stories. I know that I hear about how such stories are underrepresented or underreported. And I also spoke about the women in Mexico who were killed, and nobody was reporting about them back in my first book, actually. And it's really, really sad. And I will take off from here, which when I started reporting for the Jordan Times, the only English daily in Jordan, until recently, I was, I wanted to be the voice of these women, because back in the 90s, we didn't have social media. We didn't have all this, easy access to information. The Arabic press, which is mainly read by the wider population, did not report about this because they considered it as a family matter or taboo. But it was a story that really shocked me and pushed me to write everything I'm doing until this day. And at that time, I said I wanted to be their voice. I wanted to document these cases. I wanted to document somewhere that these women lived on this earth and someone robbed them of their lives. So in the beginning, I thought I was just a reporter. And then, as my colleague Brandy, I think we have a similar story, by the way. I was nominated for the Reebok Human Rights Award, which is given in the US. And I was chosen as one of the 4 people for the year 1998 to be awarded this award. And it's for human rights activists. And when I went to receive the award, and Glenn Close gave me my award, I discovered that I was also, Glenn Close. I discovered that I'm also a human rights activist. So when I came back, international, local, regional, all kinds of media researchers, everybody wanted to learn more about this issue, because back then it was not tackled. And I said, I want to keep talking about it and raising awareness. And no matter where I'm invited, inside or outside Jordan, schools, anywhere, I would go and lecture for free, unless, someone pays me. But otherwise, I would lecture for free, because I felt that it's important for people to know what is going on. Because one of the main problems, by the way, and I'm sure you face most of it, it's just people do not know. And when you come and start to talk about these cases, they tell you, you're exaggerating. What are you talking about? This doesn't exist, or it's only 1 or 2 cases. Even one, of course, is important, but I'm talking about how people would argue. And then I went to courts, and I discovered that our justice system was also very nice to killers and would give them 3 months, 6 months, 1 year for usually a premeditated murder. So I decided to report on that as well. Also, the Arabic press shied away from reporting about this. And then I discovered that there's a number of women who were imprisoned by the state without any charge for indefinite periods to protect them from their families, who want to kill them for reasons related to family honor. So this was another problem for me. Usually if you threaten someone's life, you go to prison, and not the other way around. So these were the 3 things that I focused on. And I believe that At the beginning, I was alone, but my main point actually was to encourage the Arabic speaking reporters to report about these. I wanted them, I said, I'm going to keep reporting and reporting, and hopefully somebody will pick up. And a lot really changed. I think the Reebok Human Rights Award in 1998 was a turning point for me in my career, because it brought a lot of attention. And then it brought a lot of young men and women who approached me and said, let's work on the grassroots level. And we started to go out across the country to talk about this issue. So the media picked up, the Arabic media, they started to report about us. The women's movement also organized a lot of activities. And we got into this big debate of, being our Western agents. We want to destroy the morals of women. We want to sexually liberate women. In our part of the world, it's different. We don't have, women are expected to behave in a certain manner, and they shouldn't have sex before marriage and all that. So this kind of social debate, be it good or bad, positive or negative, actually helped to break the social barriers and taboos surrounding this topic and many, many other topics. And like, for example, virginity testing, abortion, these are all things that you wouldn't dream of if you open the newspaper in the papers in the 90s and 80s and until mid 2000, you wouldn't see such topics: incest, rape, molestation. So this kind of debate basically helped open up a lot of other topics. And one of the important things is that also we as movements, activists and women's movements, we push the government to admit we have a problem. Before that, the government would say, oh, we don't have a problem. So when the government admitted we have a problem, then it became its responsibility to protect its citizens, especially women and children, of course. And we didn't have, imagine, until the mid-90s, we didn't have a shelter for women. We only had a temporary shelter that is run by a private NGO, but the government run we didn't have, and we kept nagging. And then the shelter opened finally in 2007, and it was supposed to house women who were in prison. They didn't like this idea. They said, no, it will be attacked. We had to wait around 10 more years to open a shelter for women whose lives are in danger, to put them in a so-called house or home, temporary home, until their situation is solved. Other things that happened, of course, we pushed everyone from the royal family, the government, everybody got involved. Forensic experts, judiciary people, everybody started to take these crimes against women more seriously, and children, of course. And they started to investigate these crimes as regular murders. Of course, we wish that women would not be killed, but if they are killed, at least to preserve their rights after their death. Because in the past, it was just another woman who was killed for the investigators. Let's try to focus on helping the man. But this is no longer the case. All the cases are taken seriously. There is thorough investigation. The justice system started handing down very tough sentences. So things have changed. And, this always gives me hope that, eventually things will change. But unfortunately, sometimes it will cost lives. It will cost harm, maybe. But things did change, in Jordan. And I don't know, Mabruk on breaking silence. Somebody knows how to speak Arabic. So yeah, that's what I have to say now.
And I wonder, Rana, how did you go about bringing that change? You talked about knocking on a lot of doors and pushing the legal system to change, speaking to everyone down from the royal family. How did you do that? Was it just your reporting, or was it other sorts of networking?
Something. First of all, you all spoke about something. Most of you spoke about humanitizing the story of a victim or a survivor. And this is one thing I focused on, because in the beginning, as I said, the Arabic press shied away from reporting. And if they would report, they would have like a small news item buried somewhere. A man killed his sister, police are investigating, that's it. So I went to the scenes, I spoke to people, I tried to give a face and name and life for this woman who was robbed of her life. When I go to conferences, I would challenge officials, I would challenge people. And at one point, I wasn't a very liked person in Jordan. And people were like, what is she doing? She's talking about taboo issues, forbidden issues, virginity, honor killing. This woman is trying to liberate other women and all that. So in the beginning, it was a single effort, but then it expanded, and then we had the group of people, and then we had the women's movement. And then, talking more and more to the people, for example, forensic experts, when you start to discuss with them, to tell them that this woman, regardless if she did something wrong in the eyes of the society or didn't, she shouldn't be killed. She's a human being. She has a life. She has a dreams. She has ambitions. I kept talking and talking and talking, and eventually, this is how things convince people. And I'll tell you a small. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I studied in the U.S. I studied in Oklahoma, and in '87 I went to the U.S. and I finished in '93. And I used to like to watch TV, mainly sports, because I'm an athlete. I was the captain of the women's national basketball team. And I liked all kinds of sports. So I would sit and watch TV in the US, and I see how much they repeat the ads. They keep repeating the ads over and over and over. So I said, I want to keep repeating and writing about all these women over and over and over and over and over until someone hears, until someone's do something, I use this again. I was just thinking, and I said, this will be a documentation for these women. And then I ended up being a human rights activist, and I ended up writing 2 books. And these things were never on my agenda. I never aimed for this.
Well, you certainly achieved a lot, Rana, so thank you very much for that indeed. And, we're getting towards the end now, but it's been a really fascinating conversation. It's really inspired me. But I wonder, does anybody have any last words or any comments? Please pop in. Yep.
I do. Hi. So I just want to add to, I believe it was, who said it? It might have been Jane. She's not, no, not Jane. Suzette. I don't know if she's here anymore, but it was either Suzette or somebody about self-care, because these stories are extremely heavy. And it's, like if you're a Native reporter, there's even more trauma that you're carrying. And even as women journalists, because the majority of women that I know have been sexually assaulted in their lives or have faced some sort of violence. So when you're going into these situations, you're taking on that trauma and you're carrying it. Like me, I carry the stories of these people. I carry them with me, and it can get unhealthy if you don't know how to do that self-care, and have outlets and have support. So if you have editors, I encourage the editors to offer that support to your journalists, offer, counseling, offer access to alternative, like holistic kind of resources, to, Indigenous journals or journalists or other, something culturally that would be helpful to them, because we have to stay healthy in this, because we are doing these big jobs and bringing these stories to the world. And so it's not easy at all. So I just want to encourage you to have that self-care plan.
Can I add one thing on that? Is that okay? I just wanted to add sort of on Brandy, and then also bringing in Chantal, talking about the realities of doing it as a freelancer, which is you have like no money. You have no money and nobody actually wants to back you. And not everyone who reaches out to want your story or to tell you their story is okay if you can't tell it. Like some of them are quite mean and like make you the sole person responsible for all of media's failings. And it can be like, I actually had that happen 20 minutes before I got on this phone, where someone was just like, I feel patronized. And all I said is, you don't have enough documents at this stage for me to be able to financially take this on, because I can't do it right now. Like, I was just trying to be transparent. And so I think sometimes people also like it's you have to take care of yourself and remember that you're only one person, and that actually you can't do everything, and not every story is the right story for you to tell. Back to Chantal's bubble of them being like, argue why the story is for you. I think that's the hardest thing every day is reminding myself that even if you do a really good job and you take it very seriously and you like do your best, some people will still be mad at you because you didn't do it the way they wanted to do it, or you didn't tell their story in exactly the right time for them and they thought that you would. So yeah, I would just say, humanize the people you're writing about, but also remember to humanize yourself, because you are still a person.
Thank you very much, Jane. That's a really good point. That's something I find myself as well about reporting on femicide, researching, reading about femicide. It's also necessary to take breaks and do something different and listen to a radio program that's not about femicide once in a while, because it can all get a little bit too much. And you want to have longevity in this career, and you want to be able to go on telling these stories, as so many of you have. Any more comments or questions?
I just have a quick comment for this incredible group of women that you brought together. I hope that maybe we could all connect together again in the future and maybe be like a support system for each other, because we're all doing this kind of work and this is so valuable. Like, I'm very inspired and uplifted by you all. So hopefully we can create that.
Yeah, absolutely, Brandy. Well, I'll put everybody together on a list, and then I was also speaking to Mallory about maybe doing a recommendations list with NIWRC for reporting on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And I know that something Suzette was talking about as well, like go into that complexity, like you can do it. So perhaps from this conversation we'll come up with a list and circle that around with Mallory's approval. I'll check with you as well, Brandy. Yeah, Diana, go on. We'd love to hear from you again, please.
I just want to mention that if anybody here wants to contact me for information, tips, suggestions, that sort of thing, I'm available as a resource. All my years in journalism, I've learned a thing or two I'd like to pass on.
I agree. I'm also happy to. I think that's some of the most important work, is actually just behind the scenes helping other people you trust find sources and get their drafts. So please.
Yeah.
Before everybody goes, can everybody just share if they have a social media where we can follow your work, please?
Sure, yeah. Does everyone want to write in the chat box their social media handle, or I can distribute them later? And I would also say as well that I'm also happy to read any drafts, and as part of my work with the Journalism Initiative, it's also my role to keep people safe and to connect people. So if anybody needs anything, I'm here. Contacts, networking, proofreading, editing, even if you just need somebody to moan to. I think we've got everybody's handles on there now. I don't think Suzette is on Twitter, is she, Mallory? But we have her email we can share. I'll send an email around to everybody later. Okay, I think this chat is going to be saved. I'm just gonna copy it. If not, Okay, thank you very much, everybody. It was really a pleasure. See you all soon, and take care. Happy reporting. Great reporting. Thanks a lot.